Hi, my name is Max Gagliardi, and this is the Talk Energy Podcast. If you're watching this video, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button on YouTube or follow us on your favorite podcast app. This episode's guest is Evan Anderson. He's the co-founder and CEO of Oseberg Energy, where he's taking energy industry data and transforming it into actionable business intelligence. Evan is someone that I've gone to throughout my career for advice and who's been instrumental in shaping the way that I think about the intersection of energy and technology. This episode's filled with advice for founders who are thinking about starting their own energy tech firm, discussions around culture and technology within the energy industry, and what the future may hold. Hope you enjoy the show. Evan, welcome to Talk Energy. Thanks for agreeing to be on the show.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
What I wanted to talk just a little bit about is early on when we first met, this is probably 10 years ago or 9 years ago. I don't remember the entire conversation. I think maybe we had lunch through a mutual connection, and I was really young in my career, maybe like 1 year or 2 years in. And you had, I think, started Oseberg at that time and were out, being an entrepreneur, doing your own thing. And I thought that was really cool. And I remember talking to you about it and saying, hey, one day, maybe I would, I have aspirations to maybe be an entrepreneur, do my own thing. And the advice that you gave me, which this is somewhat paraphrasing it, but you basically were like, well, a really easy way to not do those things is to talk about it a lot, right? And that, and again, I don't remember exactly what you said, but it was something along the lines of you have to be a doer is the moral of what you said. I don't know if those were exact words, but I kept that with me. And as I've had different pursuits and thought about things in my career, it's like, okay, I have a good idea or something that I'm passionate about. At some level, you just have to do and get to where you're doing, or it's going to be hard to find success. And so for somebody that's new and has a good idea, maybe someone who's younger or that has an idea specifically around the tech space and energy, what would be your advice to them, given what you've learned just over your career and what you've done with Oseberg? Somebody that was starting out it was a young founder that had aspirations with really great ideas. What are some of the things that you would tell that person and the advice that you would give them?
Yeah, well, first of all, that's beautiful. I'm glad to hear that, I was able to share something that resonated with you, and obviously it's carried you, given the fact that you yourself are an entrepreneur today. And so, always impressed with what you've done and the fact that you did have a vision and yet you brought it to fruition. It's no easy journey. I think it's not uncommon that you meet people that have experiences that they draw from either as consumers or as providers and have a vision for creating something. Whether it's a services business or a technology business or what have you. And I certainly empathize with kind of that fear of the unknown, and it can be overwhelming. If you haven't started a business, there's a lot to do, and there's not necessarily a nice blueprint or something prescriptive to follow. I think what kind of helps accelerate that path is surrounding yourself with people that have traveled that journey before you. In this town, being in Oklahoma City, there's no shortage of entrepreneurs in our community that have started, oil and gas companies or service companies. And so, if that's the type of business you want to start, I think the quickest path from A to Z is spending time with them and learning from them. I think how you approach those conversations says a lot about you, how much work you put into, learning something about that individual, learning something about their background and experience and what you hope to learn from them. And I think in general, people love giving. They love spending time helping others. And so, figuring out who in your network has relevant experience, I think is step one. Is you need to surround yourself with people that can really help you. And sometimes that becomes mentors. Other times it becomes just people that impart some wisdom along the way. So I think surrounding yourself with people that have traveled a similar journey is the first step. I think, number two, it's building a team of folks that can help you get from A to Z. I think, a common mistake that I see, and, I've made it myself at various points in my career is, we don't want to necessarily travel this journey alone. And so we grab the first body that is willing to travel that journey with us. And that's not necessarily the best person to build a business with. When I think about building teams, I think about, the equation should really be 1 + 1 = 4. You should be looking for, orthogonal networks. You should be looking for skill sets that complement yours, not necessarily are redundant to your skill set. So I think that's an important ingredient is as you start, you're not going to get there alone. You're going to need to start building a team, and that team needs to be, really additive and complementary to your skill sets. And so I think that's an important part of the equation. I think thinking carefully about, what is it about your service or vision or technology that really serves your market. I think, thinking carefully about, what are the pain points that you're trying to solve? I mean, all these things have been written before, in various blogs or books. And so, it's not a new formula. I subscribe to the belief that you should, whatever idea you have, you should try to kill it as early as possible. You should, get to market with it as fast as possible. No business plan survives the first customer. What you have in your head is not going to be the same thing that survives, 6 months, 12 months down the road. And so the faster you can, just do and get to market, you're going to start learning. And that's where, the real work kind of begins. Those are some of the critical elements, I think, that are needed for, any new business endeavor.
I love the nuances that you bring, when you talk about entrepreneurship. It's, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the nuts and bolts around your options for maybe raising capital or, some of the different avenues that you have to scale and to grow. But part of what I like about your advice when we have conversations is you hit on these nuanced aspects of whether it be running a business, curating an idea. You always seem to be able to touch on different things that are, like you said, some of that stuff's in blogs or, you can read it somewhere. But I always find good insight in the more nuanced topics around these subjects. And so that all what you just said was really good. What about just like the avenues for somebody you have, specifically in energy tech? Because I know that this is your background, and it'll be kind of the theme that we go through. I want to talk about the entrepreneur side of it and starting things first. Maybe later we'll talk about some of the cultural issues in it that you and I have discussed in the past, and then maybe also some of your visions for the future. But right now, from almost more of a nuts and bolts, you have these different options for taking paths. Just for somebody that's interested in that stuff, but that doesn't know what options they may have, for example, to scale or to raise capital. I love your thoughts on those topics, and it'd be great if you could share some.
Well, I think again, I think really refining your vision and finding, finding an area where there's a pain point, there's no shortage of ideas that I come up with or that I run across that are interesting and cool, but those adjectives tend not to necessarily pay. I think at the end of the day, I love the saying, no margin, no mission. The reality is that with any business, you need to be solving something that people are willing to pay for, unless you're going to fund it yourself. And so, oftentimes when people see, problems that they believe that technology can solve, I think there's a bit of refinement that needs to be done to really kind of understand, who's paying for this and why are they paying for this and what are their motivations for paying for this. I think with technology in particular, I think it's hard I try to force our team, at Oseberg and any entrepreneur to think in terms of like real dollar value, real ROIs. For example, one of the value propositions that I come across often is that this solution will save somebody time. It's faster. Well, in my experience, I don't think people do a very good job of quantifying, what their time is worth. I bet you, I could ask you, Max, what do you make per hour? What's an hour worth to you? If you had an hour, to do, that was all of a sudden free for you, what would you do with that hour? How would you create value, right? That's always a tough value proposition. I tend to like value propositions that have a direct tie between the solution and something that's actually creating, more dollars in, or it's saving a company, some amount of money. And so I think really kind of honing in on the value proposition of whatever your vision and solution is, which requires, talking to a lot of people in the market, talking to the stakeholders. I think that's again, if you don't have a business that's going to make money, then everything downstream of that is kind of immaterial. From there, I think that founders need to find good resources to structure their business and legally to get it set up correctly. I tend to find a lot of that expertise, not in Oklahoma City. I wish it existed in Oklahoma City, but we're not exactly a thriving tech hub yet. And so, for me, the closest markets that I can go to for things like that are like Denver or Austin. And I've said this before, you don't go to California for oil and gas law. You can stay in Oklahoma City. You can stay in Houston for that. But you might want to go to Austin, where a lot of the California law firms have set up shop because of the, technology scene there, to help you start any kind of tech endeavor. There's a reason why those service businesses exist there. I'd love for them to be, more, have more of a presence in markets like Oklahoma City, but just don't see that, frankly. And so getting your business set up correctly, I think, is important. I think, in terms of investment, a lot of it depends on, what milestones you think that you can achieve early on in a business. And, I mean, just looking at like a market like Oklahoma City, there's a lot of high net worth individuals. There's a lot of capital that you could potentially raise, but there may not be a lot of sophisticated investors. And so, depending on how much capital you're raising, there are vehicles that you can use to raise that capital, convertible notes, things like that, that I think the community is getting, increasingseasonally more, educated on. But I mean, there's a lot of money out there, whether it's, seed investment, whether it's, pre-revenue kind of angel type investing, whether it's, more sophisticated Series A type raising. Like, there's a lot of firms, I think, that are interested in this part of the world to make investment in industries like oil and gas, because valuations are low. There's a lot of problems that can be solved by technology. There's a lot of reason to be investing in energy tech, particularly in this macro. And so, there are a lot of resources available to, entrepreneurs, maybe not, in their neighborhood, but certainly, around the country.
So moving a little bit outside of just the nuts and bolts of starting something new in energy tech, what I'd like to focus on is some of the cultural aspects of technology and energy. And this is a topic that I think that you're fairly passionate about, or that I've heard you speak on in the past. And that is the culture of technology in the energy industry, where it's been and why things are the way they are today. What are companies doing? How are they looking at it the right way? How are they looking at it the wrong way? This is an industry with a tremendous amount of data. And so therefore you would think intuitively it should be a very tech forward industry. Although I think that we fall short in many areas. Just talk a little bit about the culture of technology in the energy industry.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, when you look at, technology adoption within sectors, oil and gas is lumped in with a number of different sectors that are, I would describe as laggards when it comes to adoption of technology. There's a lot of theories as to why. For an industry that has been built around information asymmetry, in my opinion, a lot of the information that I think, our industry views as valuable, has been locked in paper and microfiche and still arguably is. I do find it interesting that, that, when I think of cultural adoption around technology, I think this industry still looks at data and technology as a service to their business as opposed to what's core to their business. When you look at like a sophisticated quant hedge fund, if you were to look at some of the, some of their, limited partnership decks, if they were, publicly available, my guess is you would see, their investment in technology and data and the management teams around technology and data, is at the core of their existence. I don't see that on the real asset side, whether it be, real estate or oil and gas or, other real asset, kind of portfolio type companies. You can just look at any kind of private equity backed oil and gas company, and it's rare that you're going to see representation of like a CTO equivalent or a chief data officer or something like that. And, I think, some of that may have to do with like the, how they're structurally set up. When you've got kind of a 2 and 20 model, you don't have a whole lot of G&A budget to go spend a bunch of money on technology and data up front. So, typically those dollars are going to your office, your G&A spend, your office, your management teams, things like that, and not to building, a core piece of technology that's going to give you a competitive advantage. I think that because, some of the data sets that I look at and technologies that I look at applying to the space are new, I think it takes finding, a capital sponsor that's culturally aligned with you and investing in data technology in order to get something off the ground. I constantly hear that, we want to see some track record with this data and technology to give us a competitive edge before we want to, invest in it. Again, I think that's cultural. I think they're still looking for, kind of a service-oriented solution that comes, after they've got their business set up, as opposed to have a vision for how they're going to use data and technology to create some sort of competitive edge from the beginning. So, I like oil and gas because I feel like there's still a lot of opportunities to create data, to create technology that are solving, meaningful problems. But I also struggle with, some of the cultural challenges in our space. If you create a piece of data that gives you a competitive edge for a hedge fund, writing a $2 million check for that competitive advantage is, pretty commonplace. Same for insurance. You try to do that in oil and gas and you're going to have some challenges. And I think that's just cultural.
Yeah, for sure. What do you do specifically at Oseberg to try to get over those barriers of culture? And then, but before that, before you get into some of the stuff you specifically do to get over those barriers, what about some of the reasonings behind why we are where we are? I mean, some people say it's generational. I've heard that argument, and they say that, well, there's these big chunky gaps in oil and gas where you have a downturn and you lose young people, right? And then you've got older people in positions. And so maybe, but I don't know that that's necessarily the right answer. I think that there is just for some reason a general it's inelastic when it comes to some of these things, right? Like you've got this mass amount of data, but why? I mean, I don't know if you can answer this question. It's easy to identify that the culture is the way it is, but why is the culture like that? You would think that because of this industry being in some ways, like operationally, we're so technology forward, we're doing things from an operational standpoint, whether it be through, all the technologies that have unlocked shale that are above and beyond what anybody said could be done. And that by the conventions and the measurements of the people in that side of the profession are pretty outstanding advancements that have gotten us to a point where we went from thinking we had no resource or very little resource left in the US to being oversupplied with resources. And so technology was so pivotal there, yet in some of these areas around the data side and around the tools, is it just a lack of vision or strategic thinking, or just what are your thoughts on why that is what it is?
Yeah, good question. There's no doubt that, when people talk about technology and innovation within oil and gas, I think, the place that we tend to look first is around drilling and completion. And that makes sense because when you look at total CapEx spend, the bulk of that CapEx spend, at least on the upstream side of the business, is around drilling and completion. And so, it's not surprising to me that that's where a lot of the innovation is. When you look at other aspects of the business,
it's a good point.
I don't subscribe to the belief that the generational crew shift change is what's driving, adoption and innovation around technology. I just don't believe that because, I've got a lot of, friends and colleagues that I've worked with over the years that, are of the tech generation mindset, but because they learned from their predecessors how to do something one way, that's their go-to. And so, that tells me that this is more of a cultural challenge than it is a generational challenge. Every one of my peers uses, an iPhone, they use, all sorts of different pieces of modern technology in their personal lives, I don't really see the same level of adoption when it comes to just doing what they know, what they've learned over the years. I also think that, because we don't see a lot of technology adoption in the space, people are intimidated by technology. They don't understand it. And, they don't want to, nobody wants to stick their neck out and potentially lose their job over being an early adopter. And so, you don't see anybody really, adopting as a result. And there, you also run into this issue where some people are afraid that they might lose their jobs as a result of technology creating some efficiencies. I think they're giving too much credit to technology. I look at technology as a way to enable people and their qualitative skill sets as opposed to replace them. If I were still working on that side of the industry, I would be one of the first adopters in order to gain those efficiencies, and use its technology as an enablement as opposed to a replacement. It's hard to say. I mean, I know of some larger companies that are trying to adopt technology. I think one of the challenges is bridging subject matter expertise with technology expertise. Oftentimes, I see companies that try to pair technologists with subject matter experts. And I think that goes a long way towards, bridging that gap. Ideally though, what I'd like to see companies doing more of is investing in and giving their workforce, rudimentary technology skill sets so that, once somebody learns, SQL or Python or like some easily acquired skill set around technology, it starts opening, broadening their horizon in terms of thinking about what's possible. So that when a company like Oseberg or any other company comes and sits down with that individual, it's not such an educational sale. Like they understand a little bit better about, what we're doing and how they're able to, participate more in the discussion and collaborate in the discussion around how we're bringing technology to their particular workflow or whatever. And you're able to get over some of the intimidation factor, and you're able to kind of bridge the gap a little bit easier when it comes to communication. So those are some of the things that I'm seeing. I do feel like the industry is getting better at adopting. It's trying to address some of these issues, but I do believe that it's a cultural issue more than it is a generational issue for sure.
So you've talked about in the past with me kind of ROI and boiling some of these things down to looking at, you mentioned it a bit earlier around saving people time, right? Or specific deals and what's important in that deal and what deal point is going to drive value. And this is some of the things you've talked about with Oseberg and the ways you've been able to get people to use maybe your product or something that you've done that's differentiated. Talk a little bit about that, some of these ROI metrics and things that you've talked to me about in the past. I think it's really interesting trying to put a truly quantifying what the value is for some of this tech, because we know, I think and I feel like I know that it's there, but getting the stakeholders to articulating in a way to where they can point to it and say, I believe this and this is real, and I'm going to make a business decision based off of it.
Yeah, that's a tough challenge for a data and technology company is being able to frame your value proposition in real dollar terms. And it's hard to scale that within an organization as well, because it does require a little bit of subject matter expertise. I think oftentimes we think of technology in terms of ease of use. We think of it in terms of, time savings. We think of it in terms of efficiency gain. I think, technology companies in general could do a better job of working with its customers to actually putting that in dollar terms. So like, how are you, understanding how some of these oil and gas companies work, like, and what's the value to them, first of all, it starts with, goals and incentives for those goals. Like, one of the things that I try to do is pull market research to understand how executives are compensated. Like what is it? What are the benchmarks that companies are being judged on? They've got to, book reserves. They've got to, increase production. They've got to lower, OPEX. They've got to now, employ some of these ESG standards, things like that. Those are some of the ways in which the management teams are being evaluated. How does our data and technology fit in with those goals, right? If you're a private equity backed company, you've got some sort of, commitment, and you need to, if you can accelerate the deployment of that capital at some assumed internal rate of return, that's, we can start putting that into dollar terms in terms of how our data and software can, help you accelerate the deployment of that capital at that assumed IRR, and then, in terms of your back end, it's measured based off of MOIC, how can we help you, find better deals that you can get into for less, which is going to, increase, the value of your waterfall. So understanding the mechanics of these companies in terms of, how they make money, how do they create shareholder value, and then trying to tie our data sets and software into those strategic goals and communicate this in terms of a dollar ROI. You're investing X dollars with us, and our objective is to increase, value for you. What does that look like? I feel like those are much stronger value propositions than, we're going to increase your throughput by 10%. Well, what is that? What is that increase in throughput? How does that actually create value for you? Because I think that that's a much stronger way to sell than some of the value propositions that I commonly see within our space. And I don't think it's just oil and gas that struggles with this. I think a lot of data and technology companies struggle with value propositions, particularly when you're looking at B2B.
Yeah, that's good. One other thing that you've mentioned to me in the past that I've really, from an advice that you've given me, that's made me think and get my gears turning is around, somebody who's in like a service business that has either, whether it be consulting or whether it be some type of service provider. And you've told me a number of times over the years how important it is that I come up with a way to integrate tech into what I'm doing. And it's made me think about it and think about, okay, what are things that I'm doing today? How could there be tech built around what I'm doing? And it's pushed myself and my team to try to innovate and to come up with ideas. And we are working on things. And and you've been helpful in terms of somebody to bounce ideas off of. But maybe just for the benefit of the people listening, repeat some of those things that you've talked to me about why that is so important for someone to be thinking in those terms.
Right. So the context for that conversation, I read an article. I can't remember where. I want Harvard Business Journal or something along those lines. In 2014, I think Mark Christensen wrote an article about management consulting. And what I recall from the article was that consulting services was kind of evolving in that a lot of technology was starting to replace some of the work that management consultants were doing, and these management consultants were starting to become what I would say I don't know that this is how Mark Christensen characterized it, but it was tech-enabled services. And the benefit of thinking about how to codify some of the work you're doing as a consultant and building technology around that work is that it gives you something that you can leave behind with your customers. It gives you a touch point, right, where you can kind of consistently work with that customer, because now you're implementing some form of technology as part of your service. Additionally, it gives you some recurring revenue potentially if you can license that piece of technology. And to me, I'm always thinking in terms of how can I build a solution and commercialize it for some amount of recurring revenue. Obviously, because you get great multiples under the right licensing agreement with something like that. And so, as I kind of looked at your business and looked at some of the work that you were doing, it struck me that there were some solutions that you could build that potentially you could leave behind with your customers, that you could tie to some sort of recurring revenue stream and licensing agreement that may give you a competitive advantage. It may give you a competitive advantage in that it may differentiate you. It gives you, that recurring touch point, and it would give you an asset that you could, increase some shareholder value around if you were successful in licensing it.
So that's great advice on the tech and integrating it with the consulting side. I think that for the future of our business, it's absolutely a necessity and something that we're looking into and figuring out ways that we can push the ball forward in that on that side of things. But that brings me to the topic of the future and where things are going. And I know a lot of money right now is being funneled into the green side of the equation, into the renewables. And you and I both having backgrounds that are primarily in the oil and gas space. How do we fit in that future? And I don't know how much money has actually been funneled into the renewable side and specifically into tech, but it seems like I'm seeing a lot of headlines of new companies, startups on that side of the equation. Is that something you guys are looking at? And then also just, where do you see yourself evolving and what are you looking to do moving into the future?
Yeah, no doubt that we're seeing a lot of movement on the renewable side. An acquaintance of mine, it's interesting because even on the renewable side, again, this gets back to, some of my thoughts around culture and adoption of technology. A lot of the renewable plays, are coming out the gate with technology being a core focus of their business. For example, I've got some friends at Breakthrough Energy Coalition that put some money behind, a founder that I've met a couple times and really respect, where they're using, AI to help hunt for cobalt. And so, there you have a business that, is kind of looking at the renewable space. And at the core of their business is technology, right? And so, I'd love to see that more in our business, whether it be on the services side or on the upstream side of the business, where out of the gate you're thinking about data and technology as being a fundamental aspect of your business, a core competitive advantage of your business. I think we'll continue to see money flowing in that direction for sure. In the interim, I don't see oil and gas really going away anytime soon. It's the market. You could argue the market's contracting for sure, but it's such a big market and such an integral part of our society. I don't see it really going away in a meaningful way anytime soon. And there's lots of arguments for that, but for us, I would say that from our conversations and from what we see in the market, if anything, I think more people have gotten more bullish on data technology within oil and gas and energy in general. Part of the reason for that is because you still have these companies that have the goal to add production, add reserves, and they have to strengthen their balance sheets. And they need to continue to grow, but with less bodies. They need to maintain the same amount of assets with less bodies. And, a lot of the investment theses that we see from, investors in the space is that, the way that you bridge that gap is with technology. And so, and I think that's one of the key drivers of adoption is necessity. And so that's a tailwind for players like ours. The other key driver for adoption is when you see an early adopter utilizing technology in a new way and they're incredibly successful. That was the story behind horizontal drilling, is that you saw some people step out early on and have some outsized returns and success, and that's when the market followed, right? That's when you had independent, smaller upstream companies that had never drilled a horizontal well before become horizontal drillers, right? So adoption usually follows outsized success, right, or necessity. And I think in this macro, I think a lot of what's going to drive technology adoption and cultural change is out of necessity. It's an unfortunate thing to see the number of layoffs that we're seeing. But if there's a silver lining, let's hope that these companies become more tech enabled and that changes the cultural mindset of these organizations. So, I think the future is companies are having to do a lot more with less, and they're going to be looking for ways to do that. And I think technology is where they're going to gravitate to.
Yeah, and maybe clarify around the comments around the renewable side. I don't know that necessarily I'm asking or thinking that you specifically or Oseberg or even myself or anything I would be doing that's tech related would be more in that space. I'm thinking more of like the crossover and the commonality of problems. And you had mentioned that maybe some people on that side of it are viewing these as core strategies, and the culture is more like this is a core tenet of what we do. We need to solve these problems with tech-based solutions. And given the amount of investment, I always like to look at, when I look at oil and gas, or I look at, really anything I try to break things down to really fundamental variables, right? Like what is the most basic variable in this problem? And then from there kind of, build off of that. And one thing I see in oil and gas is there's it's really simple. At one level is that there's just a flight of capital from oil and gas. And you can say, well, there's a lot of reasons for that. We can talk about the different reasons, and you can go spend a whole multi-episode podcast on that. But because of that flight of capital, it's going to cause all these changes and all these opportunities, one of which you just mentioned. People are looking to cut costs to enable tech better. What I'm looking at on the renewables and the green side is there is an influx of capital and an influx of public perception of people wanting to push the envelope technology wise on that side of the equation. And because I think some of these problems are common, I'm just wondering, are there ways that there's going to be crossover, and will there be innovation that comes from that influx of capital over there that will bleed over into what we're doing? Is just a thesis that I have, that maybe, because of that culture on that side, and that the fact that energy is moving in that direction with those investment dollars, that there will be an impact on oil and gas technology as well. I don't know the answer. It's just, I'm just trying to think through it.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable to assume that the capital that's looking at, the renewable space and the talent that is looking at the renewable space, at least, from my observations, seems more, tech forward on both accounts. And so I would anticipate that those folks, whether it's capital or management teams that are going into the renewable side, culturally, they're thinking about how to leverage data and technology from the beginning. And I think that will, certainly spill into, traditional E&P. Also, a lot of what's happening in the renewable space directly impacts traditional E&P. When solar or wind farms are going in, they're competing for resources with E&P, right? I mean, we see wind farms in the middle of oil and gas development plays all the time. And, those wind farms are, you put a wind farm in southwestern Oklahoma, you're going to encumber mineral rights, which are the same mineral rights that you need to drill and explore for oil and gas. You have some competing interests there, right? You can't really develop a field if you've got a wind farm sitting on top of it. or at least not optimally. You've got roads that are being competed over. You've got right of way. You've got utility. You've got, I mean, there's a reason why, some of our, E&P companies, want to be made aware of what is happening with wind and solar, is because it impacts their business. And so, I think, some of the stuff that's happening in the renewable space is tangential to traditional oil and gas. And I think because of that, you're going to potentially see some spillover, both ways.
So for where you're at today, you guys have done a lot. How your company's been around, I think 10 years or more. And you've talked some about it, but what does the future look like for you specifically? I ask people this question a lot. It's kind of a loaded question, but, goals, aspirations, very similar to what you're currently doing, things that you're going to break off. Do you have ideas or just anything you can share about, Evan's plans for what you want to accomplish and do going into the future, given that you've already accomplished what you have thus far in your career?
Yeah, I think for us, number one would be just scaling what we've done. We feel, really good about the markets that we've served to date. And I think for us, it's scaling that over at a more national and potentially international level. And so that's our primary focus. I think secondary to that is, in order to scale our business, we've developed some really interesting, tech assets that are horizontal. They can be applied to different industries, different problems. I think we need to be smart about how we maximize the value of those assets. We're kind of exploring some things there. I don't think it's realistic for us to organically, acquire subject matter expertise in industries that we haven't traditionally been in, or build out sales teams for those industries. But there are other ways to kind of address those issues. And so it's really about maximizing, the assets that we've built and scaling the business that we've had, good success in. And so, for me, I'm constantly thinking about how to, build out our teams in order to ensure that we have the right experience and players to be successful, and scaling the business. I think that's it's nothing too crazy or sexy. It's just the next level of growth, and with that comes new challenges.
Are you still happy with the home base of Oklahoma City? I know you have family here, and there's other things probably than just tech reasons for living here, right? But is this still a place that you feel like is fostering the goals that you want to bring into the world? Or is it, there's been a lot of movement, like you'd mentioned, Denver, Austin, these places. You're seeing people go from California to these places. Talk about just your thoughts on Oklahoma City with the energy tech, but also just technology and entrepreneurship in general. I think it's a misunderstood part of the world, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but I do feel like there is a spirit of entrepreneurship here that is unlike some other places, or at least unique. But just your thoughts on the city and the energy tech space as well in general.
Well, yeah, I love Oklahoma City. I love the people here. I've got great friends here, families here. And, we've been, fortunate to be able to build a tech business in this community. But anytime, you've got employees that have kind of thrown their lot in with you. You've got investors that, have taken a bet on you. My priority is to do what's best for my employees and my shareholders. And, that may or may not be, stay in Oklahoma City. It just kind of depends on, what we need as a business and where those resources are. We have a distributed team. So, we employ folks all over the country because, we, found it difficult to find some of those skills here locally. That's not a knock on Oklahoma City. It's just a reality. I mean, as we were talking about earlier, we have some great law firms and accounting service businesses in the state that have in-depth knowledge in certain areas. But, I think, it's important to be sober about what they don't have. And I think we're doing our community a disservice when, we're purporting that we have these, we have this relevant experience when we don't, in some regards, I think our city could do a better job of bringing some of that expert, experience to the state, to the city, from outside. But I mean, I would like to stay in Oklahoma City. But if I've got to move to Denver or move to Austin at some point in order to do what's right for my employees and my investors, I'm not opposed to the idea. I'm willing to do what's necessary in order to be, a good steward of capital and to do what's, best for our employees.
Yeah, it's felt like the last, call it 10 years, really. But really, probably let's just be fair, say the last 10 years from 2010 to 2020, there has been an uprising of entrepreneurial pursuits. And I've never lived in Silicon Valley or some of these other hotspots. Probably more familiar with Austin than I am with the spots in California where you got the tech and kind of all the entrepreneurial movements. But I will say that there for a while in Oklahoma City, and it's still today somewhat, I worry that because of the downturns in oil and gas specifically and what's happened in the state, that we may lose some of that momentum. But it felt like here, because of all of the opportunities, not just underneath our feet. What's interesting about Oklahoma is we've got world-class resource underneath our feet in the energy space, as well as, look at wind, what's going on with wind energy. I mean, Oklahoma's got, resources. There's oil under our feet and it's really windy, but, it seems like this has been a place that's fostered interesting entrepreneurs. I know a lot of them, you probably know a lot of them, but people around town, it seemed like there's been just a big wave of startups and people trying to do interesting things, whether that's on the tech side. I know we've got not just in energy, but also, in general, there's been a number of kind of larger technology companies in Oklahoma, the Paycoms of the world. But one part of me worries that we're losing some of that momentum because of the downturns and the ups and downs of oil and gas. But another part of me has some hope in that, like you had mentioned with our company, we have multiple of the management team members that don't live in Oklahoma City. They live in different cities. They actually live in Texas, a couple guys, and they, we work remotely, and the technology, especially with what's happened with COVID, has allowed us to do that. So I do have some hope that maybe it can continue because of technology, right? That we can all be more interconnected. But then also, I think that there are some benefits to, and you're certainly seeing it in Texas with the inflow of people. There's a reason it's an easy place to live. It's an easy place to do business. There's a lot of people and ideas, and I hope that some of that bleeds into Oklahoma as well, because we are pretty close to that part of the world. But anyways, just kind of some general thoughts on it. But I do see that it's taken a hit a bit, but I'm hopeful that it can continue into the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Residential real estate investment is hot in Oklahoma right now. I'm seeing a new restaurant every other week. We're building hotels. Despite what's happening in the macro and us being an oil and gas town, it seems like I'm not seeing any kind of slowness in momentum. If anything, things keep moving rapidly. From my point of view, I think Oklahoma is an interesting place to look at from a tech perspective, because we've got a bunch of heavy industry that could definitely benefit from technology applications. And if I'm an investor, I'm thinking that this is a part of the country where there are lower valuations. There's smart, capable early stage management teams that you could put together. I think that the community could benefit from, some of the services that we've mentioned, coming in from out of the state. I think that, we've got entrepreneurs that have scaled businesses. There's not a lot of them, but, we could certainly bring them together and do some really good, and then there are some community members that are trying to establish Oklahoma City as a tech hub, and they're doing a great job. They're bringing in folks from out of state. They're enthusiastic about Oklahoma City. They're getting good support from the community. It's just early, and this is a journey that is going to take lots of iterations before we start to see some recycled capital. We have some entrepreneurs that have some good experience so that they can mentor, and it's just going to take time. But I think people are making the time and capital investment to try to evolve.
I agree, and I hope so too. Well, this has been pretty much the amount of time I've asked you to allot for the podcast, and it's been a great conversation. I think that you're someone, again, that especially here locally, that I've always looked to when I've had questions around energy and technology, and you're somebody that I value your advice and the wisdom you bring. So again, thank you for being on the show. I'm glad you could make it, and hope for the people listening that this was a conversation you could take something away from too.
Awesome. Well, Max, I appreciate it. Thanks for the audience and the opportunity. I enjoyed chatting with you.
All right. Thanks, Evan. Talk to you soon.